Hi, everybody. I'm Tony Kushner. Thank you. Co-chair with Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith of the Board of Governors of the Edward M. Kennedy Prize. This is the 6th time we've gathered to present the Edward M. Kennedy Prize for Drama inspired by American history. The prize was established by Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith to honor her brother, the late great senator from Massachusetts, to encourage American playwrights, theater composers, lyricists, and librettists to use the stage as a platform for exploring our country's complex history and the ways that our past informs our present and will shape our future. At this moment, when grotesque, unprecedented, and ever-widening economic inequality threatens not only the American democratic experiment, but the life of the planet, at this moment when the plutocracy and the kleptocracy have merged in a naked, unapologetic, for-profit demolition of our institutions of government, and our barbaric, I know this is sort of a bad mood this morning, and a barbaric, it's the Stormy Daniels disappointment thing. I was like, really, that's all? Okay, anyway. A barbaric desecration of every principle of civic good and a wholesale traducing of the reality principle itself. At this moment, when the ego-anarchists and canting hypocrites of the unprecedentedly unhinged right are busily, noisily distracting the national attention, trying to make us forget the past 38 years of catastrophic political misadventure that have led us to today, to the edge of the abyss, what better moment than this to award the Edward M. Kennedy Prize to a play that asks us to remember that the path to our current collective insanity was blazed by the unmediated, emancipated financial sector. I'm very pleased to be welcoming everyone to join us in celebrating a remarkable, engaged, outraged, and courageous playwright, Akhtar, and his thrilling, important play, Junk, which is the perfect title for the cacotopian world it depicts in its genesis, the perfect title for a play about an addiction to a drug, in this case money and power, that turns humans into lotus eaters, into, well, junkies of one kind or another, and is the perfectly inapt title for a beautifully wrought entertainment that is the absolute opposite of the toxic trash it brings to blistering, dramatic life. So, I want to, first of all, I want to say a couple of words of thanks to Mandy Michelle Hackett, who is on the board, on the Kennedy Prize board. The smartest thing I ever did was asking Mandy to join the board. Mandy, together with Ann Thornton, the Columbia librarian, Allison Morrow, and Ann Mesquita, have organized the entire thing today. I flaked out this year completely, and so I feel enormously guilty, but also hugely grateful to Ann and Allison and Ann Mesquita and Mandy for pulling this all together. Now, here's how we do this thing every year. We have a film about the life of Senator Ted Kennedy, Jean's brother. Then we have an actual Kennedy, Ted Kennedy Jr., who gets up and showers the room with Kennedy magic. No pressure, just, you know. I'm sure you remember to bring the Kennedy magic in there. Then, because one of the things we've learned over the years about Senator Kennedy is that he was a huge musical theater queen, really, and loved musical theater more than anything else. So in his honor, we always ask a star of the Broadway and musical theater world to come and entertain us. And tonight we're incredibly excited to have the brilliant Michael Cerveris, who will get up and sing. So when a guy gets up here and sings, you know that was Michael Cerveris. After that, we always have a little bit of substance, because one of the ideas in creating this prize was to forge a connection between the world of theater and the world of both serious inquiry into politics and a serious examination, scholarly examination of the American past. So we always ask a scholar whose work interfaces with the play to come and speak to us. And today, we're really, really thrilled to have Columbia professor and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist James Stewart, who's going to explain the entire financial structure to us in mere minutes. And if anybody could possibly do it, Professor Stewart could do it. After that, because this is a prize awarded not to a playwright or a musical theater composer and lyricist and librettist, but to a work, we're going to have a selection from the prize-winning play Junk, performed by the very, very great Stephen Pasqual, who was in the original production at Lincoln Center. And then Ayad is going to come up with me and Ted and get his prize. So I'm going to sit, I don't even remember, the film is first, so here we go.
That which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
No matter who writes the history books, when people look back on this century, they will say that Edward Kennedy was one of the ablest and most productive, most compassionate and most effective men who served in the United States Senate in the entire history of the country.
My father loved this country and was fascinated by the men and women who helped to shape its history. Whenever he felt the need to better understand an issue, he often looked back to how others had solved similar problems. He loved historical documents and biographies. Their perspective helped him gain understanding, not only of their time, but of our own.
Abe Lincoln was a quiet and a melancholy man. But when he spoke of democracy, this is what he said. He said, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master." This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this to the extent of the difference is no democracy.
And welcome.
My grandmother, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, gave tours of her home in Hyannisport.
Here is a very charming little picture of Ted with his father at the embassy, looking very serious, too. And a wonderful one of the president, late President Roosevelt.
A tradition my father followed, giving tours of his office. Like Grandma, he could narrate our nation's history from an extraordinary point of view.
This is a picture of President Kennedy and the dog tags that he was wearing in the Pacific.
My father wanted to make history come alive. He created the annual family history camping trip. He packed up all of my cousins and took us on trips to visit famous American sites in the company of historians.
Senator Kennedy has been taking his nieces and nephews and many of his family to historic places year after year. It's a wonderful family tradition. It ought to be a family tradition everywhere. because those trips can change your life.
He took us to Plymouth and the South Shore, the homes of Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville in the Berkshires, Paul Revere and Longfellow House, the Freedom Trail, the USS Constitution, the Brooklyn Bridge, Harper's Ferry, Manassas, Mount Vernon, Fort McHenry, and a church in Richmond.
After Senator Kennedy's most recent visit, where Patrick Henry made his famous speech, Ted nearly tackled me on the Senate floor the next week to tell me about it and how exciting it was to him and to the members of his family.
We can't insist that every child is going to develop a love of history or an understanding, but we sure can do everything we can to give an opportunity for the young people.
His love of American history and his place in it is treasured by our family. But his contributions to celebrating and preserving our history is his lasting gift to all Americans.
My brother, Edward Moore Kennedy, was the last of my mother and father's 9 children. Right from the start, he captured our attention. My mother had an insatiable interest in history, literature, and the arts, and she taught and quizzed each of us about what she thought was important. Mother required Teddy to memorize the poem, The Midnight Ride, of Paul Revere. She felt that Longfellow's poem was a wonderful way for her children to learn about poetry and history at the same time.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year.
Teddy always said that early exposure to our nation's history and literature had an immeasurable impact on his life. An avid reader of biographies, he authored his own True Compass, as well as several others, including a children's book on how laws are made, as told through the eyes of his beloved dog, Splash. He admired the visual arts and was an accomplished painter who shared his work with friends and family. Music was perhaps dearest to him, a gift from our grandfather, Honey Fitz, and our mother.
Ted, as you know, Sing a Sweet Adeline. I used to play for him on this piano.
Teddy and I shared an enjoyment of theater, especially for him, musical theater. He admired the discipline and skill that theater demanded of actors, directors, and writers. He was intrigued by the theater's creation of worlds based on the human imagination, either for the purposes of escaping what's difficult in life or for the purposes of confronting difficult truths. He loved the creative community, and the feeling was mutual. He was an ardent student of American history, and of course, he devoted his life to public service. For over 40 years in the United States Senate, he championed the role of the arts, the humanities, and the promotion of our cultural life as integral to the American experience. Teddy could have done anything with his life, and so he chose to do everything. We are all the better for it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Kennedy, Jr., and I'm so pleased that so many of you could make it here this afternoon to honor an incredible playwright and this year's winner of the Edward M. Kennedy Prize for Drama inspired by American history. To you, Ayed Akhtar, thank you and congratulations. I love watching that film. year after year, because my father was an incredibly hardworking and serious man who took his job very seriously and put his whole heart into this nation. But he also was very playful. And I think that this video really shows his personality comes out. And I also just wanted to recognize my family who's here this afternoon, my wife Kiki and my daughter Kylie, who's Kylie is actually a graduate student here at Columbia University getting her PhD in physics, so it's great to be here. It's great to be here at the Columbia University campus. So Junk is a fast-paced, electrifying, and insightful depiction of our country's allure, and some would say obsession, with money and high finance during the go-go days of Wall Street in the 1980s, a theme that in many ways continues to this day. Junk bonds allowed our society to feast on excess, and it portrays our culture's intoxication with greed and wealth accumulation, and how our culture was able to suspend and forget honest and ethical business practices. To me, this play really asks us to question two conflicting values in our history: individual self-interest and the right to pursue happiness versus our collective responsibility to each other. It's a classic depiction of how our country's history and culture is conveyed, and through artistic expression, which is why Junk is the perfect recipient for the Edward M. Kennedy Prize. I want to thank the selection committee for recognizing this amazing and provocative playwright among the very accomplished group of finalists. I want to thank Columbia University for hosting us here today and for, of course, administering this prize. I want to thank Tony Kushner, the spiritual leader of this award. Tony, thank you for all that you do year after year to keep this prize alive and to encourage future playwrights to tackle some of our most pressing issues that we face in our country. I want to thank all of you here today for coming. And of course, I want to thank you for bringing American history to life. Your play takes us out of our comfort zone, stretches the understanding of the American experience, and it makes history fun, interesting, and accessible, which is exactly what we need art to do. As it was said in this video, the purpose of this prize is to encourage people that are maybe new to history, even new to the theater, to develop a love of history. To Jamie Wyeth, thank you for this incredible work of art. And in this work of art, which we will award to this year's winner in a few minutes, really depicts my father's life of the sea and the ocean and his beloved sailboat, the Maya, sailing through the waves with a magical sunset, really capturing my father's life and everything and his spirit. And Jamie, thank you so much for your presence here today. But most of all, I want to thank my Aunt Jean. I did speak to her earlier this afternoon. She wasn't feeling well, but she asked me to convey her thanks and appreciation to every single person here. My Aunt Jean, no one had more fun with my father than my Aunt Jean. You know, my father's known as the Lion of the Senate, the voice of the powerless, the supporter of the NEA and arts education in our schools, a fighter for social justice, and thanks to my Aunt Jean, he will also be remembered as an artist and as a historian who desperately wanted to make art and history accessible to students and new audiences who never knew they liked history. Dad loves spending time with his artist friends. who were such great company and would help him keep things into perspective and remind him about the important things in life. And he loved the camaraderie and the friendship he shared with many artists, and they loved him and his camaraderie too. So I just want to say thank you again so much to my Aunt Jean, who shared such an incredible special bond, brother and sisterly bond, and love for each other. And I'm so grateful that Jean decided to create this honor in my father's name in such a special way. So again, I just want to say on behalf of the entire Kennedy family, thank you so much for coming here this afternoon. And thank you to an incredible work of art that we're here to recognize and celebrate.
Hello. It's only a banjo, so tuning it really won't make any difference, so we'll just go right on. I'm Michael Service. This is Joe McGinty from the Losers Lounge. I couldn't be more honored to be a part of the events today. This prize is such an extraordinary prize, and the commitment of the Kennedy family to the arts and to America is unquestioned. Ayad's play makes a villain like Mack the Knife seem downright quaint. So we're going to do a little Mack the Knife. Oh, the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has Macheath, dear, and he keeps it out of sight. When the shark bites with his teeth, dear, scarlet billows start to spread. Fancy gloves, though, wears Macheath, dear, so there's not a trace of red. On the sidewalk, Sunday morning, lies a body oozing life. Someone sneaking around the corner. Is that someone? Mack the Knife. From a tugboat by the river, cement bags dropping down. The cement's just for the weight, dear. Betcha Mackie's back in town. Louis Miller disappeared, dear, after drawing out his cash. And Macheath spends like a sailor. Did our Mackie do something rash?
Suki Tawdry, Jenny Driver, Polly Peachum, Lucy Brown. Oh, the line forms on the right, dear, now that Mackie's back in town.
Thank you.
Well, these are all very hard acts to follow. I'm James Stewart. I'm a professor at the journalism school here, and I'm also the author of Den of Thieves. And I was very intrigued, and I have to say somewhat flattered when I read early press reports about Junk that I, the author, had read Den of Thieves and along with some other works had inspired this particular work. But it also made me a very picky observer when I went to the play. I have to say, in the first maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I was very caught up in the amusing exercise of assigning the real-life characters to the fictional characters in the play. And they are very real-life, I have to say, even though some of them are still denying that they bear any resemblance to the characters in the play. And Stephen's character in particular is very close to the actual Michael Milken, who was the great junk bond financier who dominated the scandal in the 1980s. I think it's particularly appropriate that this prize is honoring something that is taken from history, because I think now with 35 and almost 40 years of perspective on those events, we can see that what happened on Wall Street in the 1980s was a very pivotal moment in both economic and political history in this country. I think we can look back over American history and see that there have been periodic times when certain figures in the business world effected profound change on American society. Certainly the robber barons, the great fortunes of the late 19th century, marked the transformation of the country from a primary agrarian economy into a manufacturing economy. And the 1980s I now like to think of as a similar transformation of the manufacturing economy to what I like to call the thinking economy, which continues to this day. Junk bonds were essentially an intellectual concept. They were an art of what now is known as financial engineering. They took no raw material whatsoever. They took computers and a mastery of intricacies of financial calculation. The junk bond of the 1980s were simply transformed into the collateralized debt obligations of 2008, which bear a remarkable resemblance to what happened in the 1980s and the aftershocks we're still grappling with today. But I think Ayed's genius was to see the inherent drama in this story, some of which I tried to capture in the book, but which he brilliantly transformed to the stage. Because after my initial trying to put names on the characters, I found myself completely swept up in the drama of his play and the sweeping themes that he managed to capture in about 2 hours of performance time. One of those certainly is a pretty traditional literary trope, which is money corrupts. And money certainly did corrupt in this case. And I was impressed that he doesn't cut any corners in clearly depicting Milken as the criminal that he turned out to be. He pleaded guilty to 6 felonies and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. At the same time, there is a complexity of the Milken character that he also captured, and which I think have made many observers of the play a little bit uncomfortable, which is what great drama, I think, manages to do. Like so many things in American life today, the character of Milken, there are extremely polarized views. There is a sort of libertarian free market following that he still commands, which thought he was a great genius who was unfairly persecuted by people who were envious of his wealth. And then there is another group, and I guess I would put myself in that category, that found that essentially he was a criminal. He may have been brilliant and a genius, and much of what he created had merit. At the same time, he knew no boundaries. He had no respect for the law. He thought he was above the law, and he committed many more felonies, in my view, than he actually pleaded guilty to. But if money corrupts, I think Junk, the play, makes clear that money also levels. It can revolutionize. Money is coldly objective, which may not provide much emotional support, but it is blind to prejudice. It is blind to the cruelty of others. It's blind to institutions that have outlived their usefulness. What really freaked many people out about Milken is that he and the empire, the financial empire he created, threatened the existing economic and social order in America. It threatened the elites of the time, which were the large blue chip corporations, their entrenched leadership, which, by the way, reflected almost no diversity in the CEO suites. Before I was a journalist, I worked at what was known as a white shoe law firm on Wall Street, and I can recall that the summer outings, not all that long ago, were held at a Long Island country club that did not have any Jewish members. And there were many barriers, not just Jews, but needless to say, people who also did not come from acceptable backgrounds, starting with African Americans who were completely unrepresented in the world that Milken was challenging. And I think Junk captures that side of him. It almost makes Milken out to be an early globalist, somebody who recognized that a human life is a human life that can be enhanced through financial techniques in some cases. So I think Junk ended up not being the salve to either camp. Milken was clearly depicted as a criminal, and at the same time, he was depicted as a force for change that in many cases that was long overdue. And I think today, when we look at the increasing disparities in wealth in this country, the great accumulations of wealth in recent years, the social unrest that has triggered, the envies of elites today, many of which seem like closed opportunities that many Americans are excluded from, and the continuing upheavals as we move away, I think, inevitably from a manufacturing economy, the message of Junk seems to me more relevant even than it was in the 1980s. So I think I'm here tonight because I think this is a great play, it's a great message, it's an important theme. I hope thanks to this prize, it will get many, many more productions, and it will get people thinking more deeply about the kind of society we live in. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Pasqual. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited for Ed and his brilliant play, Junk. I'm one of the very few actors on planet Earth who can say that he's worked on a new play with Ed Akhtar and a new play with Tony Kushner. And so, for me, having them sit next to each other tonight is a special kind of joy in Small World, although I think there's a danger in the ozone layer above their brain power, possibly having an issue at some point. You're going to hear a speech from the top of Act 2. The character is Robert Merkin, and he is addressing a room full of investors and influencers at an annual investment conference. I believe that's about all you need to know. And in true actor form, the day we closed this play, all the words went out of my head, so I'll be reading most of it. Past few weeks, the news, the papers, have been filled with nasty words about a pending deal that all of us in this room have been watching pretty closely. Saratoga McDaniel's ongoing bid for Everson Steel, a deal which, of course, was financed by the money that many of you put up. Now, seeing some of these pieces on the news, you'd think we were like locusts come upon the land. I mean, all these idyllic images of small-town American life, workers coming through the gates, hard hats, lunch boxes, fathers. The fathers, we're told, will be out of a job if Izzy Peterman has his way. We're told that Sacker Lowell and yours truly are using financial wizardry to destroy the values that made this nation great. If we're the locusts now, well, the frogs can't be far behind, right? Well, I don't agree with any of that. What is wrong in America right now, and there is definitely something wrong, has nothing to do with corporate debt. I mean, all the fear-mongering around this deal, all the waxing poetic about the death of American manufacturing, I sometimes feel like I've stepped into a collective delusion. The bizarre, self-serving belief that we Americans are somehow better than others. That American-made is better. Whether it's American steel or American cars or televisions or whatever. No evidence is offered. Just nostalgic rhetoric about what our fathers sacrificed and how great they were and how we, here in this very room, are endangering the legacy they left behind. And you marry all this Norman Rockwell sentimentality with the nasty xenophobic tirades about slink-eyed Asians copying our stuff and the dirty spics taking our jobs, and you begin to get a picture of what is actually wrong with this country today. There is a blindness out there right now, and it is not the blindness of those who see nothing but dollar signs. No, it is the blindness of a nation unwilling to question itself, unwilling to learn from the evidence of the marketplace. Because, see, the marketplace is telling us that our steel isn't as desirable as steel made in China. It isn't as cheap, as quickly produced, or superior in any way. Same with our cars, our appliances, our electronics. The Japanese are making all of these things more cheaply and better. That's the truth. Honda is a better car. That's why I drive one. But what do we hear in this country? We're Americans. We invented the automobile. We built the greatest steel mills the world has ever known. God bless America. Why don't we set aside the revolting assumption that God doesn't bless other nations? Or that somehow an American father's job is more important to his family than a Chinese father's job is to his? Let us set aside those lies, those delusions, and stick with the facts. Fact. They are winning. Fact. We need to change. Fact. When you stay blind, you can't change. And when you can't change, you die. And that is what is happening in this country right now. Thank you.
So, oh, great. So the Kennedy Prize is chosen by a secret network of nominators. They are actually secret. No one except us knows who they are, so they can't receive bribes or death threats. 20 people who work in the theater around the country who send in ballots, weighted ballots, every year in September and October, nominating plays and musicals. And then the plays and musicals, the 5 top-ranking plays and musicals are judged by a panel of distinguished judges. This year, the distinguished judges were Carol Becker, Dean of Columbia University School of the Arts, Gabriel Kahana, songwriter, Stephen Levinson, playwright, Kate Moira Ryan, playwright, James Shapiro, Larry Miller, professor of English and comparative literature and the godfather of this prize, Iman Zuri, composer, Christopher Diaz, playwright and educator, Mona Mansour, playwright, Seamus Khan, professor of sociology, chair of sociology, special advisor to the vice president for arts and sciences of Columbia University. And this panel of incredibly distinguished judges chose Junk by Akhtar. I'll read their citation. Junk takes on the vexed question of inequity dividing American society. It trenchantly examines the financial behavior and the flawed system of thought in the 1980s that paved the way for the polarized world in which we now live, manufacturing debt. In doing so, it speaks directly to the aims of the prize, enlisting theater's power to explore America's past, and through that, speak to our present, so crucial to the health of our democracy. So, Ayad, please come up and So the prize consists of two things. This is the actual prize with a print of a gorgeous painting made for the prize by the great artist Jamie Wyeth, who's here with us today, of, as Ted said, his father's beautiful sailboat. And also the bursary part of the award, which is a check for $100,000 to... Wow.
I really don't know how to respond to all of this. I'm very moved, but very moved by that film, very moved by the surpassing genius of Tony Kushner's oratory, which is so effortless and blistering brilliance. So I have written out some words that I'd like to read here, and to begin with, thank you for this incredible honor. I am so grateful to the nominators, the jury, the board, to the Kennedy family, to Columbia University. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge some people who were essential to the creation of Junk and who are here today. Doug Hughes, the director, Andre Bishop and Lincoln Center Theater, Stephen Pasqual, Annika Boris, Chris Till, Steve Klein, and resident boy genius Alex Greenfield. I am particularly moved to be here today to celebrate drama inspired by American history. I love history, its endless richness, its manifold conundrums. And on the occasion of receiving this extraordinary award, I thought I might indulge and share some thoughts about a formal conundrum which motivated me to write Junk. I've long been taken by the discrepancies between the dramaturgy of story and the processes of history. I don't necessarily imply judgment in acknowledging that we live in a time where our awareness of the past increasingly comes in the form of entertainment, of content sold to us in one way or another. For a few generations, this has meant the prestige picture in Hollywood, which morphed into a teaching tool in the classroom. Now, of course, we see the proliferation of historical narrative in long-form television, purporting to convey the inner processes of history's making. Of course, we know that narrative storytelling has its own rules. The neurological function of human identification mandates a single pole we can attach to, a protagonist through whose eyes we can see and experience the tale. This protagonist must, of course, come up against an antagonist, embodied or abstract. In the best stories, it's usually both. And in our American version of this timeless array, we are usually treated to the triumph of protagonist over antagonist. It isn't this hopeful culmination of American narrative that strikes me as discordant with history, though of course there is that. No, it's fundamentally the notion that a single individual, his or her struggles, his or her subjectivity, that these are somehow the prime movers of the historical process. The implication is that a society's moral dilemmas can be summarized by a single consciousness, that one person's march to triumph, or tragic defeat is actually all that really needs to be known. The deeper message is, of course, that how we feel about history matters more than what we think about it. I'm not sure that's right. I discovered two things in my deep study of the financial history of the 1980s. First, that the organizational and philosophical bases for our current political and civic crises found their root in that era. Second, that no single point of view could encompass the systemic changes taking place. No single agent or intention was actually responsible. New ways of making money bred new changes in the social body. Fees started to go up. The higher the fees went, the more incentives there were to do deals. The more deals, the more there was a need for deals. This led to a wholesale shift in what was philosophically permissible, a redefinition of the national higher good. This is how and why it started to be all right to prey on our own nation's infrastructure as a way to feed the system. Money was made, legislation followed. Yes, the mercantile class was rising to power, and there were consequences that flowed from that shift. Of course, now that we have a salesman, albeit of snake oil, in the Oval Office is not a coincidence. And yet, the process itself was mostly blind, consequence provoking adaptation that bred new consequence, new adaptation. How to tell that story? This is the question I asked myself. How to fracture a single protagonist into a multiplicity of driving forces? How to transform adaptation into driving action? How to dislodge the individual from the core, yet still offer the audience a necessary peg, a single point of view without which they might not be able to feel the events taking place on stage before them. That was the formal challenge. To try to mirror more closely the impersonal process of history, in which subjectivity is not operative, but operated upon. Case in point, the four younger protagonists of the play, children of immigrants or people of color all, these characters are seeking to change the world, to make room in it for folks like themselves. Money is the means of that change, but what ends up being the real transformation? Sure, at the end of the play, each of them has found their place, but in the process, money has gone from being a means to the all-consuming end. Fidelity to nation has taken a back seat to personal advancement. Neither consequence was advocated, nor even intended, and yet these are the consequences far more decisive to our contemporary history today. Thank you for this extraordinary honor.
So that's it, we're done. Thank you. That was extraordinary. Thank you so much for that. And to the Kennedy family again, thank you. I'm really sad that the ambassador couldn't be with us today, but I'll call her tomorrow and tell her how wonderful this was. And we all owe Jean an inexpressible debt of gratitude for creating this prize. And she's certainly with us in spirit today, if she's across town at the moment. So there's a reception afterwards outside this room, and thank you all for coming. Good night.